The kitchen smelled of burnt coffee and broken dreams. I stood there, clutching my laptop, the screen still glowing with the business plan I'd spent 3 months perfecting. Every spreadsheet, every market analysis, every carefully crafted projection represented hours stolen from sleep, weekends sacrificed while Marcus played golf with his corporate buddies. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. A meal prep service? Are you serious right now, Rachel? Marcus didn't even look up from his phone as he spoke, his voice dripping with the same condescension he usually reserved for waiters who got his order wrong. He sat at our granite breakfast bar in his expensive suit, the one that cost more than most people's monthly rent, scrolling through stock prices like they were the only numbers in the world that mattered. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. If you just look at the research, Marcus, the meal prep industry is projected to reach $15 billion by... $15 billion? He finally looked up, his perfectly styled hair catching the morning light streaming through our floor-to-ceiling windows. The laugh that followed was sharp and cruel, the kind that could cut glass. Rachel, honey, you can barely manage to keep our meal planning organized for a week. You think you're going to revolutionize an entire industry? The words hit like a physical blow. For 6 years of marriage, I'd been the one planning every meal, grocery shopping, cooking dinner parties for his colleagues, managing our household like a well-oiled machine. But somehow, in his mind, that experience meant nothing. It was just wife stuff, not business skills. I've been researching this for months, I said, hating how defensive I sounded. The target demographic is working professionals who... Working professionals. He set down his phone with theatrical precision. You mean people like me? People who actually have demanding careers and real responsibilities? I felt my cheeks burn. Real responsibilities. As if managing our home, our social calendar, our investments, and supporting his career advancement weren't real. As if the marketing degree I'd earned magna cum laude from Northwestern had somehow evaporated the moment I said, I do. Marcus, the numbers are solid. I've identified an underserved niche, busy professionals who want healthy, gourmet meals, but don't have time to stop. He held up his hand like a traffic cop. Just stop. Do you have any idea how many meal prep companies already exist? Blue Apron, HelloFresh, Factor. The market is completely saturated. And you think you, with zero business experience, are going to compete with corporations that have millions in venture capital? He stood up, straightening his tie, a small gesture that somehow made him seem 10 feet tall and me feel inches small. This isn't one of your book club fantasies, Rachel. This is the real world. These companies have teams of MBAs, professional chefs, logistics experts. What do you have? A Pinterest board and a dream? The Pinterest comment stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. I had created boards full of meal ideas, kitchen designs, packaging concepts. But they weren't just dreams. They were research, planning, vision boarding for a future I could see so clearly it almost hurt. I have market research, I said quietly. Customer surveys, a business plan that shows profitability within 18 months. Marcus walked over to where I stood, and for a moment, I thought he might look at my laptop screen. Instead, he closed it with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid. Rachel, I love you, but this is embarrassing. You've never run so much as a lemonade stand. You don't understand supply chains, food safety regulations, commercial kitchen requirements, insurance, labor laws. Should I keep going? Each item on his list felt like another stone in my chest. He wasn't wrong about my lack of direct experience, but the way he delivered each point was designed to crush rather than educate. That's why I want to start small, I said, opening the laptop again with trembling fingers. A pilot program, 50 customers to begin with. I've already identified a commercial kitchen space I can rent by the hour, and I've researched all the licensing requirements.
With what money? The question came like a gunshot. Because last I checked, your little freelance graphic design projects aren't exactly generating the kind of capital needed for a food business. There it was. The money. The weapon he always pulled out when he wanted to end an argument decisively. Marcus made 7 figures as a senior partner at Morrison and Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious investment firms. My freelance income, while steady, was a rounding error compared to his bonuses. I've saved $12,000 from my design work, I said, and I calculated the startup costs. It's enough for the initial inventory, licensing, and 3 months of kitchen rental. $12,000? He said it like I'd claimed to have discovered buried treasure. Rachel, do you know what $12,000 is? It's what I spend on client dinners in a quarter. It's not business capital, it's lunch money. The humiliation was complete now. 6 years of contributing to our household, of supporting his career, of managing every detail of our life together, reduced to lunch money? I've identified potential investors, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Local entrepreneurs who specialize in food startups, and there are grants available for women-owned businesses. Investors? Marcus laughed again, but this time it was different. Not just condescending, but genuinely amused, as if I'd told him a particularly funny joke. Rachel, honey, I am an investor. I know what investors look for. They want experienced management teams, proven track records, scalable business models with clear competitive advantages. They don't invest in housewives with Pinterest boards. Housewives with Pinterest boards. The phrase hit me like a slap. 6 years of marriage, and that's how he saw me? Not as a partner, not as someone with intelligence and potential, but as a housewife with Pinterest boards? What about Sarah Mitchell? She started that artisanal soap company out of her garage. Now she has retail stores in 6 states. Sarah Mitchell had a chemistry background and 15 years in cosmetics manufacturing before she started her company. And soap isn't a perishable product with complex supply chains and food safety requirements. He was right about Sarah's background, and I hated that he was right. But more than that, I hated how he seemed to have an answer for everything, a reason why every success story was different, why every path to entrepreneurship was closed to me. I've identified potential investors, I said, playing my last card, local entrepreneurs who specialize in food startups, and there are grants available for women-owned businesses. Jennifer? Marcus laughed again, but this time it was different. Not just condescending, but genuinely amused, as if I'd told him a particularly funny joke. Rachel, honey, I am an investor. I know what investors look for. They want experienced management teams, proven track records, scalable business models with clear competitive advantages. They don't invest in housewives with Pinterest boards. What about Sarah Mitchell? She started that artisanal soap company out of her garage. Now she has retail stores in 6 states. Sarah Mitchell had a chemistry background and 15 years in cosmetics manufacturing before she started her company. And soap isn't a perishable product with complex supply chains and food safety requirements. He was right about Sarah's background, and I hated that he was right. But more than that, I hated how he seemed to have an answer for everything, a reason why every success story was different, why every path to entrepreneurship was close to me. I've already done taste tests with our friends, I said, playing my last card. Everyone loved the samples. Jennifer said she'd pay $30 a meal for that quality. Jennifer? Marcus shook his head in disbelief. Jennifer Henderson, who spends $300 on a single pair of shoes without blinking? She's hardly representative of price-sensitive consumers. He walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline as if the city itself was there to support his argument. Rachel, I've seen hundreds of business plans in my career. I've watched brilliant entrepreneurs with decades of experience fail because they underestimated market challenges. The restaurant industry has one of the highest failure rates of any business sector. This isn't a restaurant, I said. It's meal delivery with a focus on... It's food service, he interrupted. And food service is brutal. Razor-thin margins, massive competition, regulatory nightmares, and consumers who'll switch providers for a $5 discount. He turned back to me, and his expression had shifted from amusement to something that looked almost like pity. Look, I admire your enthusiasm, I do, but there's a difference between having a hobby and having a business. You like cooking, you're good at it, and that's wonderful, but liking something doesn't mean you can build a company around it. The words hung in the air between us. A hobby. 6 months of research, planning, dreaming, reduced to a hobby?
Maybe, he said, his voice softening in a way that was somehow worse than his earlier condescension. You should channel this energy into something more realistic. Volunteer at a food bank, take a cooking class, start a blog. There are lots of ways to pursue your interests without risking everything we've built together. Everything we've built together. As if my contribution to our life, our success, our wealth was so minimal that risking $12,000 of my own money would somehow threaten the empire he'd single-handedly constructed. I closed the laptop again, this time myself. The gesture felt final, like signing a surrender document. "You're probably right," I heard myself say. The words tasted like ash. It was just an idea. Marcus smiled then, the kind of smile he gave me when I agreed to host another one of his work parties, or when I laughed at his boss's terrible jokes. The smile that said I'd been a good wife, had come to my senses, had remembered my place. "That's my practical girl," he said, kissing my forehead like I was a child who'd finally accepted that she couldn't fly. "There are lots of ways to stay busy. What about that charity board Jennifer mentioned? Or you could take up tennis again." Stay busy, as if my desire to build something meaningful was just about occupying time between his business trips and dinner parties. After he left for work, I sat in our pristine kitchen, surrounded by top-of-the-line appliances I'd barely used for anything more than reheating takeout. The business plan was still on my laptop, all those hours of work and research and hope reduced to a file I'd probably never open again. But as I sat there in the silence, something strange happened. Instead of feeling defeated, I felt angry. Not the hot, impulsive anger that burns out quickly, but something colder and more sustained. The kind of anger that crystallizes into determination. Marcus was wrong about one thing. This wasn't just a hobby. This wasn't just about staying busy. This was about proving that the woman he'd married, the woman he'd spent 6 years gradually diminishing, was capable of more than he could imagine.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off.
I opened the laptop again and looked at my business plan with fresh eyes, not as Marcus's wife seeking his approval, but as Rachel Morgan, entrepreneur. The numbers were solid, the market research was thorough, the plan was viable. And for the first time in months, I smiled. Marcus thought he'd ended the conversation, but he'd actually just started a very different one where his opinion wouldn't matter, one where his money wouldn't be a factor, one where his condescension would become irrelevant. I was going to build this business, not because I had his permission or his backing, but because I finally understood something that 6 years of marriage had almost made me forget. I didn't need either. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus shut down my business plan, and I'd become a master of deception. Every morning, I'd wave goodbye to him from our penthouse window as he climbed into his Tesla, then immediately transform from dutiful wife into determined entrepreneur. The moment his car disappeared around the corner of Lakeshore Drive, I was grabbing my laptop and heading to whatever coffee shop was far enough from his office that we'd never accidentally cross paths. Today's location was a small cafe in Logan Square called Been There, Done That. The owner, a woman named Carmen Rodriguez with paint-stained fingers and an infectious laugh, had already become my unofficial therapist during these secret planning sessions. The usual hideout spot?
Carmen asked as I walked in, her eyes twinkling with mischief. She'd figured out pretty quickly that I was working on something I didn't want discovered. Please, I said, settling into the corner booth where I'd spent countless hours over the past few weeks. And maybe some of that courage you keep serving with the coffee. Carmen brought over my order, a large dark roast and one of her homemade blueberry muffins, and glanced at my laptop screen. Still working on the secret project? I'd been vague about the details, but Carmen was sharp. She'd picked up enough hints to know I was planning some kind of food business, and unlike my husband, she seemed genuinely excited about it. Getting closer, I said, opening a new spreadsheet. Today I'm tackling the scariest part, actually reaching out to potential customers. The customer surveys were my current obsession. Marcus had dismissed my friends as unrepresentative, but he was wrong about one thing. I wasn't planning to limit myself to our social circle. I'd spent the past 2 weeks identifying my real target market, busy professionals in Chicago who made decent money, but worked 60-hour weeks and barely had time to grab lunch, let alone plan healthy dinners. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Kate in Seattle. "How's the secret business plan coming? Still haven't told Marcus?" I texted back, "Making progress, starting customer outreach today. Wish me luck." Her response was immediate. "You don't need luck. You need customers, and Marcus needs a reality check." I smiled despite my nerves. Kate had always been my champion, even when I'd lost faith in myself. She'd been the one to remind me that I graduated top of my marketing program, that I'd successfully launched brand campaigns for 3 different Fortune 500 companies during my corporate days, and managing Marcus's career and our household for 6 years had actually given me project management skills most entrepreneurs would kill for. My laptop chimed with a video call notification. I'd scheduled my first customer interview with 9 a.m. with a woman named Ashley Chen, who worked as a software engineer downtown. I'd found her through a professional networking group for working women, and she'd agreed to a 15-minute conversation about her meal planning challenges.
Hi, Rachel. Ashley appeared on screen, sitting in what looked like a conference room. Thanks for squeezing this in before my meeting. I'm really curious about this meal service idea. For the next 20 minutes, Ashley was as pressed for time as I'd predicted. I learned more about my target market than any amount of online research could have taught me. Ashley worked 12-hour days, ordered takeout 5 nights a week, felt guilty about her poor eating habits, and would absolutely pay premium prices for healthy, convenient meals that didn't require any planning or preparation on her part. The key thing, Ashley said as our call wrapped up, is that it has to be truly convenient, not just quick to cook. I mean, I literally don't want to think about it. If I have to choose between 15 different meal options every week, I'll just order Thai food again. After Ashley logged off, I furiously typed notes. This was exactly the kind of insight Marcus's theoretical market analysis had missed. Real customers didn't want endless choices. They wanted someone else to make the hard decisions for them. My phone rang, and I nearly jumped out of my skin when I saw Marcus's name on the screen. For a paranoid moment, I wondered if he somehow knew I was sitting in a coffee shop conducting business interviews. "Hey," I answered, trying to sound casual. "Quick question," Marcus said, his voice distracted. I could hear keyboards clicking in the background. He was calling from his office. "Did you schedule anything for Thursday night? The Hendersons want to have dinner at Alinea." Alinea, the kind of restaurant where Marcus liked to be seen, where meals cost more than most people's weekly grocery budgets. The irony wasn't lost on me. He thought my $12,000 was insignificant, but he'd casually drop $800 on a single dinner to impress clients. "Nothing scheduled," I said. "Sounds lovely." "Great. Wear the black Valentino dress, the one from our anniversary. Jennifer Henderson loves that designer." After he hung up, I stared at my phone for a long moment. The black Valentino dress that cost $6,000, more than half of my entire business startup budget, and he'd bought it without a second thought because it made the right impression at the right parties. I shook off the familiar resentment and got back to work.
I had 4 more customer interviews scheduled for the day, each one carefully timed around Marcus's predictable schedule. He had a standing lunch meeting on Tuesdays, which gave me a solid 2-hour window to work without fear of unexpected calls or texts. The second interview was with Michael Torres, a financial advisor who worked in the same building as Marcus, but thankfully on a different floor. Michael's challenges were slightly different. He traveled frequently for work and needed meals that could be easily reheated after long flights. But his willingness to pay for convenience was even higher than Ashley's. Time is literally money in my business. If spending $50 on dinner means I can work an extra hour instead of grocery shopping and cooking, that's a net positive for me. By lunchtime, I'd completed 5 customer interviews and was buzzing with energy. Every conversation validated my core assumptions while revealing new opportunities I hadn't considered. Travel businesses, working parents, medical residents, startup founders, they all had the same fundamental problem and were willing to pay to solve it. Carmen refilled my coffee cup and sat down across from me. "You look like someone who just discovered buried treasure." "Better," I said, grinning. "I just discovered that my husband was completely wrong about market demand." Carmen raised an eyebrow. "Husband problems?" I'd been careful not to complain about Marcus directly, but Carmen was perceptive. "He thinks there's no market for premium meal delivery services. Says it's oversaturated." "In Chicago?" Carmen laughed. "Honey, I run a tiny coffee shop in Logan Square, and I have customers begging me to expand into food delivery. This city is full of people with more money than time." She was right, and the data was backing it up. By the end of the week, I'd conducted 15 customer interviews, and not a single person had told me they were satisfied with existing meal delivery options. Too expensive, not healthy enough, too many choices, not enough customization, poor quality ingredients. The complaints were consistent across demographics. But the real breakthrough came when I started asking about pricing. Marcus had assumed price sensitivity would be high, but he was thinking like an investor, not like a customer. These weren't people counting pennies. They were people who regularly spent $25 on lunch without thinking twice. Paying $35 for a gourmet dinner that saved them 2 hours of planning and preparation wasn't expensive. It was a bargain. I'd also discovered something Marcus's market analysis had completely missed: the emotional component. People didn't just want convenient meals, they wanted to feel good about their choices. They wanted to impress their families, to feel like they were taking care of their health, to reduce the guilt that came with ordering pizza for the 3rd time that week. By Friday afternoon, I'd completed my customer research and was ready for the next phase: finding a commercial kitchen. I'd identified 3 potential options in different parts of the city, each with different pricing structures and availability. The first was a shared commercial kitchen in Westtown that rented space by the hour. Perfect for testing my concept without a massive upfront investment. I scheduled a tour for the following Monday, telling Marcus I was meeting Kate for lunch. The lie came easier than I'd expected, which should have worried me more than it did. The weekend brought an unexpected challenge. Marcus was reviewing our monthly expenses, something he did religiously every month, and he noticed I'd been spending more on coffee and transportation than usual. "Everything okay?" he asked Saturday morning, looking up from his laptop where he had our credit card statements displayed. "You've been out a lot more lately." My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "Just getting out of the house more. You're right that I needed to find ways to stay busy." He nodded approvingly. "Good. I was starting to worry you were getting depressed, stuck at home all the time." Depressed. If only he knew that I'd felt more energized and purposeful in the past month than I had in years. "Actually," I said, testing the waters, "I've been thinking about taking some business classes, continuing education." Marcus looked up with interest. "What kind of business classes?" Marketing, maybe some finance, just to keep my skills sharp. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was learning more about business every day, just not in a classroom. That's a great idea, Marcus said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. Much more practical than trying to start your own company. You could even help me with client presentations occasionally. Help him with client presentations. Of course, my education should benefit his career, not my own ambitions. But I smiled and nodded because for the first time, I had a secret that made his condescension powerless. Every day, I was getting closer to proving him wrong. Every customer interview, every piece of market research, every step forward in my planning was building toward the moment when I could show him exactly how much he'd underestimated me.
That night, as Marcus slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about Ashley Chen, who'd followed up our interview with an email asking when my service would be available. About Michael Torres, who'd offered to introduce me to other potential customers in his network. About Carmen Rodriguez, who'd casually mentioned that her suppliers might be willing to work with a new food business. I had something Marcus's spreadsheets and market analyses couldn't quantify. Real customers who wanted what I was offering and were willing to pay for it. The secret struggle was just beginning, but for the first time since that humiliating morning in our kitchen, I felt like I was winning. The commercial kitchen in Westtown smelled like possibility and industrial disinfectant. I stood in the doorway watching chef after chef move through their prep work with military precision and felt my stomach flip between excitement and terror. This was where dreams either became reality or died spectacular deaths. "First time seeing a commercial space?" asked Tony Castellano, the kitchen manager who was giving me the tour. He was a compact man with graying temples and the kind of knife scars on his hands that spoke of decades in professional kitchens. "Is it that obvious?" I asked, stepping aside as a woman wheeled a cart of fresh vegetables past us. Tony chuckled. "You've got that deer in headlights look. Don't worry, everyone starts somewhere. Tell me about your concept." For the next hour, Tony walked me through the kitchen's capabilities, rental rates, and health department requirements. The space was everything I'd hoped for, fully equipped, professionally maintained, and available for hourly rental. More importantly, Tony seemed genuinely interested in helping new food entrepreneurs succeed. The key, he explained as we watched a meal prep company pack hundreds of containers, is starting small and scaling gradually. Too many people try to go from zero to hero overnight and burn out before they hit month 3. I was taking notes frantically when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Running late tonight. Client emergency. Don't wait up." Another client emergency. They'd been happening more frequently lately, at least 3 nights a week. A year ago, I would have felt guilty about feeling relieved. Now I was just grateful for the extra time to work on my business without having to sneak around. "I'd like to book a trial session," I told Tony, "next Wednesday, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Tony raised an eyebrow. "You sure about the early start? Most newbies want to ease into it." "I'm sure. I'd already calculated that an early morning start would let me prep, cook, package, and clean up before Marcus expected me home for our usual 7 p.m. dinner routine." As I drove home through rush hour traffic, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Rachel, this is David Kim from Venture Kitchen. We spoke last week about potential investors." My heart rate spiked. David was a food industry consultant I'd reached out to after one of my customer interviews. I'd mentioned I might be interested in exploring investment opportunities down the line, but I hadn't expected to hear back so quickly. "Hi, David," I said, pulling into a parking garage to focus on the call. "What's up?" "I've been thinking about our conversation, and I'd love to introduce you to someone. Her name is Patricia Washington. She runs a fund that specifically invests in women-owned food businesses. She's in town this week and has some time Thursday afternoon if you're interested." Thursday afternoon, the same day as the Alinea dinner with the Hendersons. But this was exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been hoping for.
Real investors who understood the food industry, not just Marcus's dismissive assumptions about what investors wanted. "I'm very interested," I said. "What would I need to prepare?" "Just bring your business plan and be ready to talk numbers. Patricia's direct. She'll tell you immediately if she sees potential or not." After David hung up, I sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at my phone. This was the moment of truth. I could keep playing it safe, testing recipes in Tony's kitchen and selling to a few friends, or I could take the leap and present my business to a real investor who might actually take me seriously. I thought about Marcus's certainty that no legitimate investor would back a housewife with Pinterest boards. The old me would have internalized that doubt, would have convinced myself I wasn't ready, that I needed more preparation, more credentials, more permission. The new me called David back and confirmed the Thursday meeting. But first, I had to survive Wednesday's kitchen trial. I arrived at Westtown Kitchen at 5:45 a.m., loaded down with ingredients I'd carefully sourced from 3 different specialty suppliers. My first test menu was ambitious: Mediterranean herb-crusted salmon with quinoa tabbouleh and roasted vegetables, followed by Korean-inspired beef bowls with kimchi and brown rice. Tony was already there, drinking coffee and reviewing delivery schedules. "Ready to find out if this is as easy as it looks on cooking shows?" he asked with a grin. It wasn't. For the first hour, I felt like I was trying to perform surgery while riding a unicycle. Every task took twice as long as I'd planned. I burned my first batch of quinoa, over-seasoned the salmon, and somehow managed to cut myself while chopping vegetables, a rookie mistake that made Tony shake his head. "First rule of commercial cooking," he said, handing me a bandage. "Slow down. Speed comes with practice. Quality comes with patience." By hour 3, something clicked. I found my rhythm, developed a system for multitasking, and started thinking like a chef instead of a home cook. By noon, I had 40 perfectly portioned meals packed and labeled, ready for delivery. "Not bad for a first-timer," Tony said as I cleaned my station. "Most people produce half that volume on their first day." I was exhausted, but exhilarated. More importantly, I had proof of concept. Real meals, real packaging, real products that looked and tasted like something people would pay premium prices for. That night, Marcus was already asleep when I got home. I stood in our bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror, hair disheveled, clothes smelling like herbs and garlic, small cuts on my hands from my knife work, and realized I looked like someone who'd actually worked for something instead of just talking about it. Thursday morning brought the most terrifying moment of my journey so far. I was scheduled to meet Patricia Washington at 2 p.m., but Marcus had suddenly decided to work from home, camping out in his study with conference calls and spreadsheets. "What are your plans today?" he asked over breakfast, not looking up from his phone. "Lunch with Kate," I lied smoothly. The deception was becoming second nature, which probably should have bothered me more than it did. "Say hi for me," Marcus said absently. "Don't forget, Alenia tonight at 8. The Hendersons are expecting us to be impressive." Impressive, code for "don't embarrass me in front of my colleagues." Patricia Washington's office was in a sleek building in River North, the kind of place where real business happened. I arrived 15 minutes early, clutching my laptop bag like a lifeline, and tried to calm my nerves in the lobby. Patricia turned out to be nothing like I had expected. Instead of the intimidating power suit I had imagined, she was wearing jeans and a blazer, with short gray hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She greeted me with a firm handshake and led me to a conference room overlooking the Chicago River.
"David tells me you're working on a meal delivery concept," she said as we settled into chairs. "Tell me what makes it different." For the next hour, I presented my business plan with more confidence than I'd known I possessed. Patricia asked sharp questions about scalability, logistics, and competitive advantages, but unlike Marcus's dismissive interrogation, her questions felt constructive. She was testing my thinking, not trying to tear it down. "Your customer research is impressive," she said, flipping through my survey results. "Most entrepreneurs skip this step and end up building products nobody wants." When I finished my presentation, Patricia leaned back in her chair and studied me. "I'll be direct, Rachel. Your concept is solid, your research is thorough, and your financial projections are realistic. What concerns me is experience. Have you ever managed a food business? Dealt with supply chain issues? Handled food safety compliance?" "No," I admitted.
But I've managed complex projects in my previous marketing career, and I've spent the past 2 months learning everything I can about the food industry. I'm also planning to hire experienced staff to handle areas where I need support. Patricia nodded approvingly. Good answer. Too many entrepreneurs think they can do everything themselves. She paused, then said something that changed everything. I'd like to offer you $50,000 in seed funding, plus access to our network of food industry mentors. In exchange, I'd want 15% equity and a seat on your advisory board. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. $50,000? More than 4 times what I'd saved, offered by a professional investor who'd spent an hour picking apart my business plan and found it worthy of real money. That's incredibly generous, I managed. It's not generosity, Patricia said with a smile that reminded me of Carmen's. It's a good investment. I see something in you that I don't see in most first-time entrepreneurs. You've done the work. You've talked to customers, tested your concept, thought through the challenges. Most people show up with an idea and expect me to fund their education. As I drove home in a daze, I kept replaying Patricia's words. She'd seen something in me that my own husband had missed completely. She'd looked at the same business plan Marcus had dismissed and seen potential worth investing in. That evening, as I dressed for dinner at Alinea, I felt like I was putting on a costume. The black Valentino dress, the expensive jewelry, the role of supportive wife, it all felt like an elaborate performance now. At dinner, Marcus held court with the Hendersons, regaling them with stories of his latest deals and market insights. I played my part, asking the right questions, laughing at the appropriate moments, being the charming accessory he needed for his professional image. But when Marcus started talking about the meal delivery market, claiming it was oversaturated and too risky for serious investors, I nearly choked on my wine. He declared, the fundamentals are all wrong. Thin margins, high customer acquisition costs, logistics nightmares. Smart money is staying away from food delivery startups. Jennifer Henderson nodded sagely, as if Marcus had revealed some profound truth about market dynamics. If only they knew that just 6 hours earlier, a successful food industry investor had offered to back the exact type of business Marcus was declaring impossible. I excused myself to the restroom and stood in the mirror looking at my reflection again. This time, though, I wasn't seeing someone who'd worked hard for something real. I was seeing someone living a lie, pretending to be content with a life that no longer fit.
When I returned to the table, Marcus was explaining why he'd steered his wife away from a ridiculous food business idea she'd had. The table laughed sympathetically, as if he'd saved me from some terrible fate. But I just smiled and sipped my wine because I had a secret that made their condescension irrelevant. Tomorrow, I would call Patricia Washington and accept her offer. I would open a business bank account, sign a partnership agreement, and officially become an entrepreneur. Marcus thought he'd ended my business dreams with his dismissive lecture in our kitchen. Instead, he'd started something he couldn't control, something he couldn't diminish with his expertise or his money, something that was about to prove him spectacularly wrong. 6 months after accepting Patricia's investment, I was running on 3 hours of sleep and pure adrenaline, but I'd never felt more alive. The alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m., just like it had every day for the past month. Marcus groaned and pulled a pillow over his head as I slipped out of bed, believing I was going to some new fitness class that started absurdly early. If only he knew I was actually heading to Westtown Kitchen to prep meals for 87 customers who'd signed up for Nourish, the name Patricia and I had chosen for my meal delivery service. 87 customers who paid an average of $38 per meal and had a 93% satisfaction rate according to our weekly surveys. The numbers were intoxicating. More importantly, they were real. "Morning, boss," called Jasmine Torres as I walked into the kitchen. Jasmine was my first hire.
a culinary school graduate with a brilliant mind for flavor combinations and an efficiency in the kitchen that made my early attempts look embarrassingly amateur. Patricia had connected me with her through the mentorship network, and hiring Jasmine had been the best business decision I'd made so far. "Morning," I replied, tying on my apron. "How did yesterday's Korean fusion menu perform?" "Sold out by noon," Jasmine grinned. "We've got 12 people on the waiting list for next week's Korean bowls. Also, that food blogger from Chicago Eater wants to interview you." Chicago Eater! 3 months ago, the idea of food media attention would have terrified me. Now it felt like a natural progression. Word about Nourish was spreading organically through social media, professional networks, and old-fashioned word of mouth. We'd grown from my initial test batch of 40 meals to nearly 500 meals per week, with a waiting list that grew daily. "Schedule the interview," I said, pulling up our production schedule on my tablet. "But make sure it's during daytime hours." Jasmine nodded, understanding the constraints I operated under. My team knew I had family obligations that required discretion about my schedule, and they'd never questioned why our business owner disappeared every evening by 6 p.m. sharp. The morning flew by in the familiar rhythm we'd developed. Jasmine handled the protein prep while I focused on our signature grain bowls and seasonal vegetables. Maria Santos, our part-time packaging specialist, arrived at 9 a.m. to start boxing finished meals with our distinctive black and gold labels. "Rachel," Maria called from the packaging station, "we've got another corporate inquiry. A law firm downtown wants to set up weekly catering for their staff meetings." Corporate catering wasn't part of our original business model, but customer demand had forced us to expand faster than I'd planned. Law firms, tech startups, medical practices, they all wanted reliable, healthy catering that made them look sophisticated to clients and employees. "Which firm?" I asked, though something in her expression told me I wasn't going to like the answer. "Morrison and Associates." My blood ran cold. Morrison and Associates was Marcus's firm. The same Marcus who declared meal delivery businesses unsustainable was working at a company that wanted to hire exactly the type of service he'd mocked. "I'll handle that inquiry personally," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. By noon, we'd finished production and were loading delivery vehicles. I'd hired a small fleet of drivers, mostly college students who appreciated flexible schedules and good tips. Watching them head out with insulated bags full of our meals never got old. Each delivery represented a customer who'd chosen us over cooking for themselves, over other meal services, over the endless options Marcus insisted made our market impossible to penetrate. I was reviewing next week's menu planning when my phone rang. Patricia Washington's name on the screen always made me smile now. She'd become more than an investor. She'd become a genuine mentor and friend. "How are the numbers looking?" Patricia asked without preamble. She was calling from Austin, where she was visiting another portfolio company. "Gross revenue this week was $38,000, I reported. Food costs are holding steady at 32%, which gives us healthy margins even after labor and delivery." "Outstanding," Patricia said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "That puts you ahead of our 6-month projections. Have you given any more thought to the Series A conversation?" Series A funding. The next level of investment that could take Nourish from a local Chicago business to a regional or even national operation. 6 months ago, I'd barely understood what the term meant. Now I was actively planning for it. "I think we should wait until we hit consistent weekly revenue of $50,000, I said. "That'll give us a stronger negotiating position and prove we can scale sustainably." "Agreed. You're thinking like a real CEO now, Rachel." CEO. The title still felt surreal, but it was becoming more natural every day. I was making decisions that affected dozens of employees and hundreds of customers. I was responsible for supply chains, profit margins, health department compliance, payroll taxes, all the complex business realities Marcus had insisted I couldn't handle. After Patricia hung up, I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Home early today. Can you pick up that wine from Binny's for tonight's dinner party? Tonight's dinner party. I'd completely forgotten that Marcus was hosting some colleagues at our apartment. The same colleagues who'd probably be eating our catered meals at work while having no idea their host's wife was the entrepreneur behind their favorite new meal service. The wine run gave me an excuse to stop by our business bank, a small branch in Lincoln Park where I'd opened Nourish's accounts under my maiden name. Rachel Morgan, CEO of Nourish LLC, had a very different relationship with money than Rachel Reynolds, Marcus's wife, who asked permission to spend more than $100. "Good afternoon, Miss Morgan." The banker, James Patterson, greeted me warmly. "Here for the weekly deposit?" Among other things, I'd also like to discuss expanding our business credit line. The numbers were impressive enough that James didn't even hesitate. Nourish had gone from a $50,000 seed investment to generating nearly $200,000 in revenue over 6 months. Our cash flow was positive, our customer retention rate was above industry averages, and our growth trajectory justified increased credit access. "We can increase your line of credit to $75,000. Given your revenue growth and profit margins, you qualify for our premium business rates." $75,000 in available credit, more than Marcus spent on his car, offered to me based on the business I'd built from scratch while he remained completely oblivious. That evening, I played hostess for Marcus's dinner party with the same skill I'd developed for running a commercial kitchen. The guests included several partners from Morrison & Associates, a few clients, and some other financial professionals from Marcus's network. As I served wine and made small talk, I listened to their conversations with new ears. "The food delivery market is getting interesting," mentioned Robert Hayes, one of Marcus's partners. "We've been looking at some investment opportunities in space." Marcus laughed dismissively. "I hope you're being careful, Robert. The fundamentals are still shaky. High burn rates, customer acquisition challenges, logistics problems." "Maybe," Robert replied thoughtfully, "but some of these newer companies are finding creative solutions. There's one local outfit that's gotten really popular with downtown professionals. Nourish, I think it's called. Their catering is fantastic." I nearly dropped the wine bottle I was holding. Marcus's own colleague was praising my business while Marcus continued to insist the entire industry was doomed. "Never heard of them," Marcus said with a shrug. "Probably another flash in the pan. These local food startups come and go every month." "I don't know," Robert continued. "My assistant orders from them twice a week, and their customer service is exceptional. Plus, their financial backing seems solid. Word is they're already talking to Series A investors." I excused myself to the kitchen, ostensibly to refresh the appetizer platters, but really to process what I'd just heard. Marcus's colleagues were not only aware of Nourish, they were impressed by it. They saw it as a legitimate business worth investment consideration, while Marcus remained convinced that meal delivery startups were inherently flawed. The irony was almost too perfect. Later that night, as I cleaned up after the party, Marcus was unusually talkative. "Great evening," he said, loosening his tie. "Robert mentioned some interesting investment opportunities, though I had to set him straight about that food delivery nonsense." "Oh," I said, loading dishes into the dishwasher. "He's gotten excited about some local meal prep company." I explained why the business model doesn't work. Thin margins, high churn rates, logistics problems. He'll thank me later for steering him away from a bad investment. Marcus had just convinced his colleague to avoid investing in my company, a company that was exceeding growth projections and generating consistent profits. The same company that Patricia Washington, a respected food industry investor, had deemed worthy of significant capital and mentorship. "You're probably right," I said, because agreeing with Marcus had become as automatic as breathing. But as I finished cleaning the kitchen, I was calculating numbers in my head. At our current growth rate, Nourish would hit $50,000 in weekly revenue within 2 months. That would trigger our Series A planning, which could bring in millions in new investment and fuel expansion to other cities. Meanwhile, Marcus was so confident in his expertise that he was actively discouraging investment in the exact type of business he'd convinced himself couldn't succeed. I went to bed that night with a secret that felt like it might burst out of me at any moment. In 6 months, I'd built a company that was outperforming projections, impressing industry professionals, and generating more weekly revenue than most small businesses see in a year. And my husband, the financial expert who'd laughed at my business plan, didn't even know it existed. The momentum was building toward something inevitable. The question wasn't whether Marcus would eventually discover what I'd built, it was when, and how spectacular his shock would be when he realized the housewife with Pinterest boards had created exactly the kind of successful business he'd insisted was impossible. As I drifted off to sleep, I was already planning tomorrow's production schedule and next week's menu innovations. Because while Marcus was sleeping soundly in his certainty about what I was capable of, I was building an empire he couldn't even imagine. The conference room at the Chicago Business Journal was intimidating in its simplicity. Glass walls, modern furniture, and a view of the Loop that screamed success. I sat across from Elena Vasquez, the publication's food and beverage editor, trying to project the confidence of someone who belonged in rooms like this.
So, Rachel Morgan, Elena said, consulting her notes, Nourish has gone from 0 to nearly $250,000 in annual revenue in less than 8 months. That's remarkable growth for a bootstrapped food startup. $250,000. Hearing the number spoken aloud by a respected business journalist made it feel more real than all the spreadsheets and bank statements I'd been obsessing over. We've been fortunate to hit the market at the right time, I said, falling back on the humble tone Patricia had coached me to use with the media. There was clearly a gap between what busy professionals needed and what existing services were providing. Your customer retention rate is exceptional, over 90%. What's driving that loyalty? I launched into the explanation I'd rehearsed, but genuinely believed. Consistent quality, personalized service, and the kind of attention to detail that larger companies couldn't match. What I didn't mention was that our success was also fueled by the intensity of someone who had everything to prove. Industry insiders tell me you're exploring Series A funding. Any timeline on that? We're in early conversations with several investors, I said carefully. Our goal is to expand to Milwaukee and Indianapolis by next summer, which will require significant capital investment. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, covering everything from our supply chain partnerships to our plans for sustainable packaging. By the time Elena walked me to the elevator, I felt like I had successfully represented not just Nourish, but the entire community of women entrepreneurs who'd been told their ideas weren't viable. The article will run next Wednesday, Elena said as we shook hands. I think our readers are going to be very interested in your story. Next Wednesday, the same day Marcus had mentioned he'd be traveling to New York for a client meeting. Perfect timing. I could share the article with my team and celebrate without worrying about him accidentally seeing it. My phone buzzed as the elevator descended, a text from Jasmine. Emergency at the kitchen. Need you here ASAP. 20 minutes later, I rushed into Westtown Kitchen to find chaos. The main refrigeration unit had failed overnight, threatening thousands of dollars worth of ingredients and potentially derailing the week's entire production schedule. How bad is it? I asked Tony Castellano, who was coordinating with repair technicians. Bad, Tony replied grimly. We've moved what we can to backup fridges, but you're looking at significant losses. The repair could take 12 hours, which puts your Thursday deliveries at risk. This was exactly the kind of crisis Marcus had warned about, the operational challenges that could sink a food business overnight. 6 months ago, I would have panicked. Now, I was already calculating solutions. What's our overflow capacity at other kitchens? I asked Jasmine. I've called around, she said, consulting her phone. Artisan Kitchen in Bucktown has space tomorrow morning, and Shared Prep in North River can take some of our volume. Within 2 hours, we'd relocated our entire operation across 3 different kitchens. It cost us nearly $4,000 in emergency rental fees and overtime pay, but we met every delivery deadline. More importantly, not a single customer noticed the disruption.
Crisis management, Patricia Washington said when I called to update her. This is where you find out what kind of CEO you really are. Sounds like you handled it perfectly. It cost us a month's worth of profits, I said, still feeling the stress of the day. And you kept every customer happy, Patricia countered. That's worth 10 times what you spent. Your reputation is your most valuable asset in this business. She was right, as usual. By evening, our customer service inbox was full of compliments about the day's meals, with no indication that anyone suspected we'd nearly faced a complete production meltdown. That night, Marcus was unusually quiet during dinner. He kept checking his phone and seemed distracted, which wasn't entirely unusual. His work had been demanding lately, but something felt different. "Everything okay?" I asked as we finished eating. Marcus looked up, his expression troubled. "Just some challenging market conditions. Nothing you need to worry about." But over the next few days, his mood grew increasingly dark. Phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, late nights at the office, tense conversations with colleagues that I could hear through his study door. Meanwhile, Nourish was having its best week ever. The Business Journal article had generated tremendous buzz, bringing in dozens of new customers and 3 serious inquiries from potential Series A investors. Patricia was fielding calls from venture capital firms who'd read about our growth and wanted to discuss funding opportunities. "We need to talk about timing," Patricia said during our weekly call. "The interest level is high enough that we could probably raise $2 to $3 million without much difficulty." $2 to $3 million. The number was almost incomprehensible. A year ago, I'd been nervous about spending $12,000 of my own money. Now professional investors were offering to bet millions on my ability to scale a national business. "What would that kind of funding mean for operations?" I asked. "Rapid expansion. You could be in 10 cities within 18 months, maybe 24 cities within 2 years. We're talking about building a real national brand." A national brand. The phrase sent shivers of excitement and terror through me in equal measure. Friday morning brought unexpected news. Elena Vasquez called personally to tell me the Business Journal article had generated more online engagement than any food industry story they'd published in the past year. "We'd like to follow up with a video interview," Elena said. "Something for our website and social media channels. Are you available next week?" "Absolutely," I said, already mentally rearranging my schedule. But as I hung up, I realized the media attention was creating a new problem. The more successful Nourish became, the harder it would be to keep it secret from Marcus. Chicago's business community was small enough that news traveled fast, and Marcus knew people at every major company in the city. That evening, my worst fears were confirmed in the most unexpected way. Marcus came home from work looking like he'd seen a ghost. He poured himself a large whiskey, never a good sign, and stood at our kitchen window, staring out at the city. "Bad day?" I asked cautiously. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You could say that. We lost the Meridian Industries account today. $3 million in annual fees. Gone."
Meridian Industries. I knew that name. They were one of our largest corporate catering clients. They'd been ordering from Nourish twice a week for the past 2 months. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "What happened?" "Budget cuts," they claimed, but the real reason is they're shifting their business to younger, more innovative advisors. Apparently, our approach is too traditional, too conservative. Marcus took another sip of whiskey. 20 years of relationship building, and they dump us for some hotshot firm that promises better returns. I felt a stab of sympathy despite everything. Losing a major client was devastating for any business, regardless of the industry. "I'm sure you'll bounce back," I offered. Marcus turned from the window, his expression bitter. "Will we? The market's changing faster than we can adapt. Clients want advisors who understand new technologies, emerging markets, alternative investments. They want innovation, not experience." It was the first time I'd ever heard Marcus sound uncertain about his professional capabilities. The man who'd always projected absolute confidence in his expertise was suddenly admitting that the world had moved beyond his understanding. "Maybe this is an opportunity to learn new approaches," I suggested gently. "At my age?" Marcus laughed again, still without humor. "Rachel, I'm 52 years old. I'm not reinventing myself to chase trends that probably won't exist in 5 years." But even as he spoke, I could see him processing something. His phone had been buzzing throughout our conversation, and when he finally looked at it, his face went completely white. "What is it?" I asked.
Marcus stared at his phone screen for a long moment before looking up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Complete bewilderment mixed with something that might have been recognition. "There's a business article being shared around the industry," he said slowly, "about a local food startup that's disrupting the meal delivery market. The CEO is a woman named Rachel Morgan." My heart stopped. The Business Journal article had published early. That's an interesting coincidence. Marcus looked at his phone again, then back at me. Rachel Morgan, founder and CEO of Nourish Meal Delivery Service, graduated from Northwestern with a marketing degree, started her company 8 months ago with $50,000 in seed funding. The silence in our kitchen was deafening. "Northwestern marketing," Marcus said quietly. "Like you." I stood frozen, watching my carefully constructed double life collapse in real time. "Rachel," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper, "please tell me this is just an incredible coincidence." But we both knew it wasn't, and the look in his eyes told me that everything, our marriage, our life together, the entire foundation of who we thought we were, was about to change forever. "We need to talk," I said finally. Marcus set down his whiskey glass with deliberate care. "Yes," he said, "we really do."
The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. Marcus sat at our granite breakfast bar, the same spot where he'd demolished my business plan 8 months earlier, reading every word of the Chicago Business Journal article with the intensity of a forensic accountant examining evidence of fraud. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the Chicago skyline and trying to prepare for a conversation I'd imagined hundreds of times, but never quite believed would actually happen. "$250,000 in annual revenue," Marcus said finally, his voice strangely flat. "90% customer retention. Series A funding discussions." He looked up from his phone. "This is you." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "Yes. Nourish Meal Delivery Service, the company Robert mentioned at our dinner party, the one I told him to avoid investing in." Marcus laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "The one I said would fail within 6 months." "Yes," I said again. Marcus scrolled through the article again, stopping at specific quotes. "Listen to this," he said, his voice taking on an edge. "Morgan's innovative approach to meal customization has captured a market segment that larger companies have struggled to reach." Innovative approach, market segment. He looked up at me. "You're being praised for the exact strategies I told you were impossible." I remained silent, letting him process the full scope of what he was discovering. 8 months ago, you asked me to look at your business plan. I told you it was impossible. I told you the market was oversaturated, the margins were too thin, the competition too fierce. His voice was getting tighter with each word. I told you that you didn't have the experience, the credentials, the understanding of how real business worked. "I remember every word," I said quietly. "I told you investors would never take you seriously, that you were a housewife with Pinterest boards trying to play businesswoman." Marcus set his phone down with careful precision. "And you built it anyway. You built exactly what I said couldn't be built." "I built it anyway." Marcus stood up abruptly, beginning to pace around the kitchen like a caged animal. "Where did the funding come from? The article mentions $50,000 in seed investment plus additional rounds. That's real money, Rachel. Serious money." "Patricia Washington runs a fund that specializes in women-owned food businesses. She offered me funding after reviewing my business plan." "Washington Ventures, I know that name. Patricia Washington has one of the most selective investment criteria in the city. Conservative, methodical, doesn't back anything unless the fundamentals are rock solid." He stared at me. "She backed you?" "She did. Within a week of our first meeting. The same business plan I told you was worthless? The same concept I said no serious investor would ever consider?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Patricia Washington, who's made millions by identifying viable businesses, immediately saw value in an idea I dismissed as fantasy. The irony hung between us like a physical presence.
Marcus, the investment expert with 20 years of experience, had completely misjudged an opportunity that a respected venture capitalist had immediately recognized as promising. How? Marcus asked, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. How did you build all of this while living here, married to me, sharing a bed with me every night, without me having the slightest clue? I took a deep breath. I got up at 4:30 a.m. every morning and worked in a commercial kitchen until 2 p.m. I told you I was taking fitness classes, meeting friends for lunch, running errands. I hired a team, built relationships with suppliers, managed customer service, handled logistics, dealt with health department inspections, navigated supply chain disruptions. Marcus was staring at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Every morning for 8 months? Every single morning, including weekends when you played golf, including days when I was sick, including the morning after your birthday party when I had food poisoning from that oyster bar you insisted we try.
The fitness classes? Marcus said slowly. Early morning meetings with friends? The errands that always seem to take hours longer than they should. All lies, I confirmed. Every excuse, every explanation, every reason I gave for being out of the house, it was all cover for building the business you told me was impossible. Marcus resumed pacing, his movements more agitated now. Do you understand what this means? You've been running a company while married to me. There could be conflicts of interest, ethical implications, disclosure requirements. Conflicts of interest? I interrupted. Marcus, you're an investment advisor. I deliver meals. How exactly are we competing? That's not the point. Marcus's voice rose for the first time. The point is, you've been lying to me for 8 months, living a completely separate life, building a company that makes everything I told you about business look like amateur analysis. Everything you told me about my capabilities was wrong. Apparently so, he said, the words coming out like he was admitting to a crime. My phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. Emergency meeting request from Tribune Food Critic. They want to feature you in Sunday's restaurant review section. This is huge! I glanced at the message, then at Marcus, who was watching my expression carefully. More media attention? He asked. The Chicago Tribune wants to feature Nourish in their Sunday food section. Marcus sat down heavily, as if the weight of my success was physically crushing him. 8 months ago, I was worried you'd embarrass yourself by trying to start a small catering business. Now you're being featured in major publications as a successful entrepreneur. The morning you showed me my business plan, I said, sitting across from him, I thought I was asking for your support as my husband. Instead, I got a lecture from an investment advisor who couldn't see past his own assumptions. I was protecting you, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. I thought I was saving you from failure, from embarrassment, from wasting money on something that couldn't succeed. You were protecting your own expertise, I said, the words coming out harsher than I'd intended. You couldn't imagine that someone without formal business experience, especially your wife, might succeed where you predicted failure? Marcus flinched as if I'd slapped him, but he didn't deny it. Maybe you're right. Maybe I was so invested in being the expert, the one with all the answers, that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. What's happening at Morrison & Associates? I asked, changing the subject, but not really. You've been stressed about work for weeks, taking calls at all hours, coming home looking defeated. Marcus looked surprised by the question, then resigned. We're hemorrhaging clients. The financial services industry is changing faster than we can adapt. Younger firms are offering innovative strategies, digital platforms, alternative investment options. Our traditional approach isn't competitive anymore. How bad is it? Bad. Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. We've lost 30% of our client base in the past 6 months. The partners are discussing downsizing, possibly dissolution. Some of the younger associates are already interviewing with other firms.
I felt a stab of genuine sympathy. I'm sorry. I know how much that job means to you. Does it, though? Marcus asked. I thought it did. But sitting here, learning that my wife built a thriving business while my established career crumbles, it makes me wonder if I've been confusing comfort with competence. My phone rang. Patricia Washington's name appeared on the screen. I should take this, I said. Of course, Marcus replied. Don't let me interrupt your real life. I answered the call, walking to the far side of the kitchen for some privacy. Rachel, Patricia's voice was excited. I just saw the Business Journal piece. Outstanding coverage. But more importantly, I've got news. 3 different VC firms called today wanting to discuss Series A funding. We're talking serious money, potentially $5 to $7 million. $5 to $7 million? The number hit me like a physical blow. That's incredible. There's more. One of the firms specifically mentioned national expansion potential. They think Nourish could be operating in 15 to 20 cities within 2 years. I glanced back at Marcus, who was pretending not to listen but obviously hanging on every word. We need to meet tomorrow, Patricia continued. This kind of opportunity moves fast, and I want to make sure we're prepared for serious negotiations. After I hung up, Marcus was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. 5 to 7 million? He said quietly. I heard. Patricia thinks we could expand nationally. National expansion. Marcus repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. The woman I told couldn't handle a local catering business. The contrast was almost too perfect to believe. As I'd been building Nourish into a potential national brand, Marcus's established career had been collapsing. While I'd been proving that innovation and adaptability could create extraordinary success, he'd been learning that experience and tradition weren't enough to guarantee survival. Marcus, I said, sitting back down across from him, I need you to understand something. 8 months ago, when you dismissed my business plan, you weren't just critiquing my idea. You were defining who I was and what I was worth. Marcus nodded slowly. I realize that now. For most of our marriage, I've accepted your definitions. I've been the wife you needed me to be. Supportive, deferential, content to operate in your shadow. But building Nourish taught me something important. What's that? Your definitions of me were wrong. Not just about business, but about everything. My intelligence, my capabilities, my potential. You consistently underestimated all of it. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. And now? I know who I really am. Rachel Morgan, CEO of a company that employs 15 people and serves hundreds of customers every week. Rachel Morgan, who major investors want to back with millions of dollars. Rachel Morgan, who built something meaningful from nothing while you were certain it was impossible. And Rachel Reynolds? Marcus asked quietly. The woman I married? I looked around our expensive kitchen, our luxury apartment, the life we'd built together that suddenly felt like an elaborate performance. Rachel Reynolds was a character I played to make our marriage work. She was who you needed me to be, not who I actually am. So what happens now? Now we figure out if there's room in this marriage for who I really am. The kitchen fell silent. Outside, Chicago hummed with its usual evening energy. Millions of people living their authentic lives, while we sat in the wreckage of our carefully constructed pretenses. Marcus looked at me with something that might have been respect, or might have been fear. The woman who built Nourish, he said finally, she doesn't need me, does she? I considered the question honestly. No, I said. She doesn't. Then I guess we both know what comes next. The notification sound from my phone cut through the morning quiet of my Lincoln Park apartment. 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and already the world was demanding my attention. 3 years had passed since that humiliating conversation in Marcus's kitchen. And now my mornings began with updates from 16 different cities where Nourish operated. Breaking. Local food entrepreneur featured in Forbes 30 Under 30.
read the text from my publicist. Except I wasn't under 30 anymore. At 34, I'd aged out of that particular list. But Forbes had created something new. 30 who changed everything, featuring entrepreneurs who'd fundamentally disrupted their industries regardless of age. I poured my coffee, single-origin beans from a small roaster in Portland, whose business had tripled after becoming a Nourish supplier, and opened my laptop to scan the morning reports. Seattle was up 18% month over month. Denver's corporate catering division had landed 3 major hospital systems. Phoenix was ahead of projections by 22%. The numbers were intoxicating, but what really caught my attention was an email marked urgent from my head of HR. Major situation developing, need to discuss it before 9 a.m. call. I dialed immediately. Jenny, what's going on? We've got a problem, Jenny Martinez said without preamble. Morrison and Associates is trying to poach our head chef in Chicago. I nearly laughed out loud. Morrison and Associates, Marcus's former firm, had been acquired by a larger company after their bankruptcy. The new owners were apparently trying to launch their own corporate catering division and had decided Nourish's success was worth copying. Which chef? I asked. Jasmine Torres. They offered her a 60% salary increase and equity in their food service subsidiary. Jasmine, who'd been with me since the early days in Tony's shared kitchen, who'd helped me navigate that catastrophic refrigeration failure, who designed half the menu items that had made Nourish famous. What did she say? She turned them down. Told them she wasn't interested in working for a company that copied other people's innovations instead of creating their own. I smiled despite the situation. Jasmine understood something that Marcus's former colleagues apparently didn't. That success came from building something meaningful, not from replicating someone else's formula. Good for her, but we should probably review compensation across the board. If they're targeting our talent, others will too. After hanging up, I found myself thinking about the irony. Marcus's old firm was now trying to copy the business model they'd once deemed impossible. They wanted to hire the team that had proven them wrong, implement the strategies they'd dismissed, and capture the market they insisted didn't exist.
The morning flew by in the usual cascade of decisions that came with running a rapidly scaling company. A supplier issue in Los Angeles that required immediate attention. A partnership proposal from a major grocery chain that could double our retail footprint. A journalist from the Wall Street Journal who wanted to interview me about the meal delivery revolution. At 2 p.m., I was reviewing expansion plans for the East Coast when my assistant knocked on my office door. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. Says it's personal." I looked up from the demographic analysis I'd been studying. "I don't have any personal appointments today." "He says his name is Marcus Reynolds and that it's about the Morrison and Associates situation." The pen slipped from my fingers. Marcus, here, in my office. 3 years after our divorce, 6 months after Morrison and Associates had filed for bankruptcy, and now apparently connected to their attempt to poach my employees. "Send him in," I said, curious despite myself. Marcus looked different than I remembered. Older, obviously, but also somehow lighter. The expensive suits had been replaced by well-fitted but clearly off-the-rack clothing. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, but he carried himself with less of the aggressive confidence I'd associated with him for so many years. "Hello, Rachel," he said, extending his hand formally. "Thank you for seeing me." "Marcus, this is unexpected." He glanced around my office, taking in the awards on the walls, the photos of team members from various cities, the view of downtown Chicago through floor-to-ceiling windows. Impressive space. Very different from where this all started. "It is. What brings you here? And what does this have to do with Morrison and Associates?" Marcus sat down across from my desk, his expression serious. "I heard about their attempt to recruit your team. I wanted you to know that I had nothing to do with it, and I think what they're doing is despicable." "You work for them now?" "God, no," Marcus almost smiled.
I'm a consultant for small businesses now. Help entrepreneurs develop business plans, find funding, avoid the kind of mistakes I made when I was. He gestured vaguely. When I was who I used to be. This was news to me. The last I'd heard, Marcus was working as a contract financial analyst somewhere in the suburbs. What kind of consulting? Startup guidance mostly. I work with a nonprofit that helps women and minority entrepreneurs access capital and mentorship. Turns out my experience of being catastrophically wrong about market opportunities makes me useful for helping people avoid similar blind spots. The irony was almost too perfect. Marcus, who had once epitomized the gatekeeping mentality that kept innovative ideas from getting support, was now working to tear down those same barriers. That sounds meaningful, I said carefully. It is, and it's taught me something important about what I did to you, to us, to your business idea. I leaned back in my chair. Which is, I wasn't protecting you from failure when I dismissed your plan. I was protecting myself from being wrong. I was so invested in my own expertise, so certain that my way of analyzing business was the only valid approach, that I couldn't see what was obvious to anyone willing to look objectively.
Marcus paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. Rachel, I came here because I owe you more than an apology. I owe you acknowledgement of what you accomplished despite my attempts to discourage you. You've lost me. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a magazine, the latest issue of Food and Wine, with a cover story about innovative meal delivery companies. Nourish was featured prominently. Do you remember what I told you about your business plan 3 years ago? Every word. I told you it was impossible. I told you the market was oversaturated, the margins too thin, the competition too fierce. I told you that no serious investor would ever consider backing someone with your background. You did say all of those things. Marcus opened the magazine to the Nourish feature. This article calls you the visionary who revolutionized American eating habits. It says your company has created over 800 jobs and generates annual revenue of $47 million. That's accurate. I was wrong about everything. Not just slightly wrong. Catastrophically, completely, embarrassingly wrong. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside my window, Chicago hummed with its usual afternoon energy. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because 3 weeks ago, I met with a young woman who's trying to start a sustainable packaging company. She's brilliant, passionate, has done incredible research. And she told me that her ex-husband keeps telling her the idea is impossible, that she doesn't have the experience or credentials to succeed. I could see where this was going. What did you tell her? I told her about you, about how I'd completely misjudged the potential of a brilliant business plan because I was too threatened by my wife's innovation to support it. Marcus looked directly at me. I told her that the people who say ideas are impossible are usually the ones who've never had the courage to test their own assumptions. Did it help? She's launching next month, found an investor who believed in her vision, built a team that shares her values, and developed a product that could change how food companies think about environmental responsibility. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he looked genuinely happy. I can't undo the damage I did to our marriage or to your confidence 3 years ago, but I can make sure the next brilliant entrepreneur doesn't get shot down by someone like me. I found myself genuinely curious about this version of Marcus. Humbled, supportive, focused on helping rather than hindering innovation. What happened to Morrison and Associates? Exactly what should have happened. The partners were so focused on protecting their traditional approach that they missed every major market shift in financial services. By the time they realized they needed to innovate, it was too late.
And you? Lost everything. The house, the car, most of my savings, my reputation in the industry. Spent 6 months feeling sorry for myself, then realized I had a choice. Keep wallowing in resentment or use what I'd learned to help other people succeed. Marcus stood up, extending his hand again. I should let you get back to your real work. I just wanted you to know that what you built here isn't just a successful business. It's proof that innovation comes from places the establishment never thinks to look. After he left, I sat in my office for several minutes, processing the unexpected encounter. The Marcus I'd been married to would never have admitted errors so directly, would never have repositioned his career around supporting other people's dreams. My phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. "Heard about the visit from your ex. Everything okay?" I typed back, "Better than okay. Turns out people can change more than we think." That evening, I drove to Logan Square for dinner at Carmen's Cafe, the same place where I'd planned those early customer interviews while hiding from Marcus. Carmen had expanded since then, opening 2 additional locations and launching her own line of coffee blends. "The usual booth?" Carmen asked as I walked in. "Actually, let's sit at the counter tonight. I want to see the operation." As Carmen prepared my order, I watched her team work with the kind of efficient coordination I recognized from my own kitchens. The cafe had evolved from a simple neighborhood spot into a small empire, but it had maintained the warmth and community focus that had made it special. "Business looks good," I observed. "Can't complain, and I owe some of it to you." "How so?" Carmen smiled, wiping down the espresso machine. "You showed me that starting small doesn't mean thinking small. Watching you build Nourish from those secret planning sessions to what it is now, it gave me permission to dream bigger." Permission to dream bigger. The phrase stuck with me as I drove home. That's what I'd really been seeking 3 years ago when I'd presented my business plan to Marcus. Not just financial support, but permission to believe my dreams were valid. Marcus's dismissal had forced me to find that permission within myself. And in doing so, I discovered something more valuable than external validation, the confidence to define success on my own terms. My phone chimed with an email from Patricia Washington. "Saw the Forbes piece. Proud of you. Also, got a call from that sustainable packaging entrepreneur your ex-husband is mentoring. She wants to discuss a potential partnership with Nourish." I smiled, recognizing the perfect symmetry. Marcus's attempt to support someone else's innovation was bringing new opportunities back to the company he'd once tried to discourage. The story of Nourish was far from over, but the story of Rachel Reynolds, the woman who'd once accepted other people's limitations as her own reality, had ended the moment I decided to build something meaningful regardless of who believed it could succeed. And that transformation, from doubt to certainty, from permission-seeking to permission-giving, was the real legacy I was building.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.